During the summer of 2003, events in the northeastern United States involving a strange, human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little or no information was left intact, as most online and written accounts of the creature were mysteriously destroyed. Primarily focused in rural New York State and once found in Idaho, self-proclaimed witnesses told stories of their encounters with a creature of unknown origin. Emotions ranged from extremely traumatic levels of fright and discomfort to an almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remained powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. In early 2006, the collaboration had accumulated nearly 24 documents dating between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 continents. In almost all cases, the stories were identical. I've been in contact with a member of this group and was able to get some excerpts from their upcoming book. A Suicide Note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him, for once I awoke and felt his presence, and once I awoke and saw his form. Once again, I awoke and heard his voice, and looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Linny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry, translated from Spanish, 1880. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me, his wet hand. I will not sleep. His voice. The rest of the text is unintelligible. A Mariner's Log, 1691. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed I felt a sensation. He took everything. He must return to England. We shall not return here again at the request of the Rake. From a Witness, 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip from Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids right to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him I thought he got out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly, his knee almost knocked me out of the bed. He then grabbed me, said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for a half second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, there was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into the fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, the creature scrambled around the side of the bed, and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of motion right along the bed until it was less than a foot from my husband's face. The creature was completely silent for about 30 seconds, or probably closer to 5. It just seemed like a while, just looking at my husband. The creature then placed its hand on his knee and ran into the hallway, leading to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop him before he hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouching and hunched over about 20 feet away, He turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter Clara. The creature ran down the stairs while my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was very badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the Rake." My husband drove his car into a lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. They did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never showed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact and began talking about our experiences. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now refer to as the Rake. It took the 4 of us about 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages and never mentioned it again. A ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the Rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the Rake had visited any of us before our last encounter. I set up a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in my bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blurring through the recordings at 8 times the normal speed. It still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the Rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when I was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on the recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the Rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he has been in my room while I slept. I know in fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring at me. Since it's the Halloween season, I thought I'd share a small legend that occasionally makes its way around town where I live. There's a lot of dense forests here in the Seattle area, and people like to tell stories about a tall, hairy creature that walks between the trees at night. There's lots of Bigfoot rumors around here, but they say it's definitely something else. More like the Michigan Dogman or some kind of werewolf. The big difference is that it has an animal skull for a face with sharp rows of teeth and large empty eye sockets. Or at least that's what people say. See, the thing is that the legend says it doesn't like to be watched, and it recognizes and avoids all kinds of cameras. Convenient, I know. This, combined with other details that I'll mention later, leads me to believe that this cryptid could have been a regular person at some point. Anyways, the story goes that it lives deep in the forests near Seattle and Bellevue, watching hikers from a distance and feeding off of deer and wild berries. These food sources can be inconsistent though, which leads to the main risk that I'll get into after the instructions. Most reported sightings are around Coal Creek, so that's probably where you'd want to go if you're looking for it. That's also where I guess its most common name, the Coal Creek Demon. Some people say that it's a vengeful spirit from the long-lost mining settlement that used to be there, but that sounds a bit too melodramatic to me. I'd say it's probably the result of some freak accident, but I'm not a scientist or anything, so who knows. There's no real reward for encountering this so-called demon that I've heard of. But if you want to seek it out anyways, here's what you need to do. Results are far from guaranteed. It can only be in one place at once, and it doesn't live to serve your interests. If nothing else, it's a fun excuse to go camping with some friends. To conduct this ritual, you'll need a gift, described below, camping equipment, flashlights, blindfolds, and a remote-activated light source. Some of these items are only necessary for certain approaches, so you can read ahead and decide what exactly you need to bring. Step 1. Prepare a gift. This could be a metal token or some kind of trinket, but it's usually recommended to bring a nice meal consisting of red meat and berries. This is a very important step, because without a gift, it most likely won't show up. And if it does show up, you need to leave immediately. Step 2. Set up camp deep in the woods. If you can still see lights from other structures, you aren't far enough. You'll want to go in the late evening so that you can set everything up just before sunset. Step 3. Put away all recording devices and limit your light sources to your flashlights. You can also start a fire as long as it doesn't burn too bright. The idea here is to create a welcoming environment while also maintaining a protected area. Step 4. Set up your remote-activated light source a few feet away from the edge of your camp, and place your gift next to it. Keep the light switched on for now. Step 5. Sit back and relax. Once the sky is pitch black, you just need to wait for a sign. Feel free to chat and play games with anyone you brought along with you, just as long as you all have a clear view of the tree line. Step 6. Eventually you might realize that something is observing you from a distance. It could be a tall shadow in the distance, the snapping of foliage, a sudden, unnatural silence, or just the feeling of being watched, if you believe in that sort of thing. If you notice any of these signs, it could very well mean that you've made contact. You're now ready to move on to the next step. Step 7. Stop all conversation and reduce your noise as much as possible. Switch off the light next to your gift and make sure your flashlights are pointed away from it. This is also where you need to pay close attention to these instructions, as any mistake past this point will cause the demon to panic, which can have very dangerous consequences. Step 8. The demon should now approach your gift slowly. Stay calm and avoid any noises or sudden movement. Do not shine a light on it or take out any recording devices. If everything is done correctly, it will take the gift and briefly gaze at the people in your camp. However, if it ignores your gift and instead starts moving toward your camp, you need to get up and run to the nearest shelter you can find. Your lights will no longer matter, so just focus on moving as fast as possible. If you can't find anything nearby, try to hide in the surrounding foliage. According to all known recollections, it can run much faster than any human, so whatever you do, do it fast. This is the point at which most would be content to stop. So if you've had enough, just stay in place until it makes a small bowing motion with its head and walks back into the forest. But if you're an idiot like my friend, you can continue through these next steps and potentially get a much closer encounter. I don't recommend it. In my opinion, you're just asking for trouble by now. Step 9. While this creature is near your camp, quickly eliminate all sources of light and put on your blindfolds. This is where it comes in handy to be using flashlights, as turning them off is much easier than dousing a fire. Step 10. The demon will now feel free to explore your camp and inspect you up close. You'll hear it rummaging through your supplies and pacing around you. You might even feel its breath on your face, but you need to remain calm and stay still. And whatever you do, do not remove your blindfold. This creature is known to be relatively passive towards humans if unprovoked, but if you happen to hear any sudden sounds of distress from your friends, immediately evacuate the area as described earlier. Step 11. Wait until it loses interest and walks away. Once you can no longer hear its footsteps, you're free to take off your blindfolds and turn your lights back on. You've now stood face to face with a cryptid and lived to tell the tale. But you've got some bragging rights with anyone who's willing to believe you. Like I said, there's no big reward, so it's mostly just about having the experience. Important notes. Now let's talk about the risks here. As you may have already assumed, stories say that it has an occasional tendency to eat people, so there's that. However, based on my research, it seems to only do this when starved or provoked, so you don't have to worry, as long as you play it smart. If anything, you should feel bad for the hikers who randomly run into this thing with no preparation. I'd recommend going out during the summer or early fall, since that's when the blackberries are in season and the wildlife is most active. That's just my theory, but most of the darker stories I've heard take place during winter, so I'd say it holds some water. Now, like I said earlier, there's a chance that you could startle the demon and cause it to panic. I believe this is usually caused by it suddenly being caught in clear view by a person, so that's why you don't want to shine a light on it or try to record it. If it panics, then it will either run off in a hurry or attack the person watching it, mostly depending on how far away it is. That's why it's a stupid idea to let it walk around your camp, because one mistake could be enough to put you on a missing persons poster. Past encounters. Because of the positive reception of this post, I decided to do some more research on this thing. I found a lot of neat stuff, but there's too many stories to go over them all, so I'll just cover the big ones. The case of Brian Matthews. So, back in 2004, this kid found himself in a bad situation, and I'm not just talking about him having two first names. At the age of 9, he's out on a hike with his parents when suddenly they turn around and he's just gone. I don't know what they were doing having him at the back of the line, but that's not the point here. Obviously, they immediately panic and run around yelling to him, and when that didn't work, they went to the police. Within a few hours, park rangers were sweeping the area, and after 2 days with no results, they brought in the National Guard. While they're out searching on day 3, the kid turns up, but not with the cops. Instead, a group of backpackers find him sitting on a tree stump 20 miles north from where he went missing. When they brought him in, he was healthy and well fed. When asked where he'd been, he just said that he was playing with a friendly bear he'd met. When shown an artist's sketch of the Coal Creek demon, Brian immediately identified it as the creature he was talking about. Articles quote him as saying, "Did you meet him too?" when he first saw the sketch. In my opinion, this is a pretty big boon for the ex-human theory, unless there's some species of wild animal that just so happens to have a habit of caring for human children like a parent would. Stephen's camping trip. Now, as I mentioned briefly, my friend Stephen carried out this whole process and ended up getting in over his head. At the time, we were both graduating high school, and he went on a camping trip with some other seniors to celebrate. I would have joined, but I was down with COVID at the time, so that was a no-go. Besides, I wanted to give him some space since I knew he had feelings for one of the people going. I should have seen it coming that he would do something stupid to try and impress her and screw up massively. The group was telling scary stories around the campfire one night, so we brought up this ritual, and of course some of the people wanted to try it. We didn't want to look like a wuss, so we just went along with it. Once they started to get things rolling, most of the group checked out and walked down to the beach instead, including his crush. It was way too late for him to back out by then, so he'd just won the award for world's biggest backfire. So at this point, it's almost pitch black outside. The 4 remaining people are putting beef jerky on a paper plate, and Steven's just trying to keep his pants dry. They sit out with the plate for a while, and just as they're about to call it quits, the thing actually shows up. Everyone there is totally paralyzed, but they still move on to dousing the fire and wrapping bandanas over their eyes. I can only assume their brains were just running on autopilot by that point. Now it's pacing around the camp, slowly rustling through their bags and inspecting them one at a time. When it gets to Jack, this really wiry kid with red hair, apparently its breath hits his face and makes him jump in his seat, shaking off his blindfold in the process. The whole group hears a dry shriek, and takes off their blindfolds just in time to see him get thrown into the tree line, and they all bolt out of there. Stephen went and ducked behind a big log, spending about 20 minutes huddling in a ball and freaking out. When he heard footsteps approaching, he thought he was done for, only to see that it was the rest of the group coming back from the beach. He ran up to them and started incoherently rambling about what was going on, but he realized that the demon was completely gone. Imagine walking back from the beach only to find the people you left there cowering in shrubbery and rambling about a giant monster that isn't there. I wouldn't even know what to think of. Of course they didn't believe them, even though Jack was covered in bruises and scratches. I guess they thought it was some sort of elaborate prank, and they just ended up being pissed. I wouldn't believe him either if it weren't for the fact that I know he could never orchestrate something like that if he tried. Overall, it was a very bad night for Stephen. And that's all I've got. If I remember anything else worth mentioning, I'll be sure to update this page. Thanks for reading, and good luck out there.